Okay, so welcome for you. I know that you're sick at home, so I'm doing this video for you. And hopefully you can join me. I'll see you in class next week or the week after for the other student. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk to you about Impressionism before we start our class. Who knows anything about Impressionism? You can just shout it out. What do you know about the Impressionist painters and how are they different? What do you first notice when you look at an Impressionist painting? Okay, let me start. Okay.
It's either all bright or all green.
Excellent. So there's two different types of Impressionists, right? So a lot of the Impressionist painters use white in their palette. So when they use white in their palette, everything is kind of opaque, right? So it might be yellow and white, or it might be a red, a vermilion red and white. So you have this like kind of pinkish tone. So everything is kind of mixed with white, right? And then you have the other type of Impressionist where everything is just like almost right out of the tube, right? And what they're doing is they're using the color wheel, okay? So this is our color wheel. So they're using the color wheel and they're contrasting opposite areas, right, of the, say for an example, the reds and the greens or the yellows and the purples. The reason why they're doing that is that has never been done before, right? When you're looking at Impressionism, Impressionism started for three reasons. The first reason it started is people started painting plein air, and they painted plein air before. But the difference is they had to bring the painting also back to the studio. They couldn't stay outside. So painting plein air, right, and it's P-L-E-I-N, right, A-I-R, means that they're kind of painting outside with their easel, okay? And a lot of artists did that before to capture landscapes and also to capture people. But they didn't have the tubes of paint. So in 1864, John Rad made the first tube of paint, right? So you have now these artists that now they can go outside because they have tubes of paint which they didn't have before. Before, artists were making pigments. You know, when I go to Italy, I show the students how, you know, if you were Caravaggio, how you were painting then and kind of grinding these pigments, which were kind of actually dangerous, some of them to breathe, and mixing them with different linseed-oils. I actually make my pigments now, but I know how to do it the right way, right? With beeswax and kind of moving the pigments and making oil paints. It's a big process. But all of this now has been condensed to a tube. So now people can go outside and paint. The other thing about Impressionism is it's usually a reaction to what happened before. So you notice that each, how can I say, style or each area that we can encompass of painting. So you might have Impressionist painting. You might have Post-Impressionist. You might have realist, you might have surrealist, right? You have all these different types of styles, and they're usually a reaction to the other style, okay? So in the 80s, what became popular? Computer art, right? Because the computers were coming out. Then after that, they were like, okay, what can we do now? We can't go back to minimalism, and we've already been in the computer age. What do? We do conceptual art. So the statement was important first. Before you read, you know, you had to read this conceptual statement and it was about the piece of art. And then that changed now, where the computer has rapidly changed, where we now have images on our cell phone, that we have these museums opening up where everything is digitalized, right? If you go to 2nd Avenue or 1st Avenue, we have that museum here, where you can actually see paintings, and people are paying thousands of dollars for these images where they can keep changing them on these digital frames and platforms for their house. So everything is always changing. So Impressionism was not only because of the tube of paint, it was because of reaction to what was before. The other thing that Impressionism brought about was not only that, but a different type of texture that you really didn't see before. So before, if you're going back, let's just say we're going back to Masaccio, or we're going back to, let's say, Cimabue during that time, the Renaissance, even post-Renaissance, pre-Renaissance, we all had these Madonnas. And we had all this religious art because the church was sponsoring that. You had the church and the state together, right? It's a different type of government. And the artists are being supported by that. So that's what they were painting for these churches and these cathedrals, right? I still do that. But then they kind of moved on, and what they did is they took that Madonna figure, and she's still kind of wearing, if you look at a lot of early Dutch paintings later on, she's still wearing, you know, this kind of shawl over her head, but the colors drastically start changing, and they become to be very realist, right? As far as who can make the skin, you know, a certain color, and who can see the veins going through, and how can we make this really more exciting? But also, how can we move away from this religious art and move the most of the ideas into everyday life? So you see, even when you're looking at people, all of the different types of impressionists, there have, you know, women in the garden weeding, or taking care of their children, right? Or they're working. This was not something that people wanted to buy back then. You had kings and queens and very royal people that were buying paintings for their house, and they really don't want to see the working class, right? They wanted to see themselves in portraiture, right? So this is very popular. Or religious art, thinking that if they bought this art, they would be closer to heaven. I mean, if you go to the cathedrals in Europe, that's all you see, right? Is these, you even see their graves where they paid for them. If you go into the churches, I wrote a whole book on art and cathedral art, and how if you go into the churches, you'll see these artworks, and they bought them and even put their graves in the church because they thought if they were closer to the altar. They're moving away from that, right? Now, the Impressionists don't have anything to do with that. They're like, we want to go outside, we want to capture the art. And there's even modern Impressionism that even came into New York, right? The Ashcan School. That's kind of like, even though it's a different type of Impressionism, they were painting plein air directly on site. And it was a little bit more modern because they were painting factories and like burnt out buildings and stuff like that. So Impressionism does change. It's still different labels today, but it moves around different types of societies, especially if you're looking at different types of paintings like I do all over the world, okay? And the last thing with Impressionism is you could also paint plein air, but you had to paint fast, so the materials had to be different. They weren't using acrylics then, they were using oils. So they were doing these studies, and they could change the color. And the third reason is because of the light. They were trying to capture the light. So you're correct when you say that they had these bright, vivid colors. You know, sometimes you might see the sky as a bright, like orange, you know, and it's not even really that color. So they are exaggerating the colors, and they're really playing with the light. And they're putting their creativity into it, right? They didn't have to paint something that's super realistic, right? They can kind of put their strokes into it. And lastly, they could put texture. You didn't see a lot of textural paintings before. They were kind of all smooth. Even if you're looking at oils or egg tempers, they're kind of done with these little fine brushes. These are large brushes now. We're moving into large strokes, okay? So I want you to think of those things. All of those things are important because when you're painting, you are going to be looking at something, and I bought this cheesy calendar, I know, from the dollar store. Right? You're going to be looking at something like this. This is a landscape. And I want you to think of all of those things because I want you to think, how am I going to, right, take this picture and make it look like an Impressionist painting? And for each of you, if I made you, I'm not going to make you do anything, but if you had to, each person, if everybody had to copy this, you know, one picture, everybody's going to do it differently. Some people might have larger brush strokes. Some people might change the colors of the sky and make it a little bit more exciting, right? Some people might put a little bit more texture or prepare the canvas ahead of time. So I want you to think, the most important thing about painting is seeing, right? So everyone will tell you, yeah, I can teach you how to use the brush. That's easy. Right, I can teach you how to do the strokes, but it's seeing and what you're seeing in your mind and putting that onto the piece of paper, right? And that's your creativity in your head, okay? So again, you know, and there's thousands of different kind of pictures you could look at. Some people might look at this, if they're going to do it very smooth and realistic, or some of you are going to have rush kind of brush strokes into each other. So that's really why I wanted to go over the ideas of Impressionism, and so you can have that in your mind. and also think about the color wheel. So I'm going to send you this for homework. I'm going to send you a picture of a color wheel in case you don't have one, and everything that I tell you in class, because you might be asleep after work. So I'm just showing you this Van Gogh, right? I'm just showing you this because I want to talk to you about the brush strokes, and I want to just show you an example. When you're looking at this painting and you look at the color wheel, do you see the relationship of all of the opposite colors, like taking this green against the red and these blues? That's so typical in each Impressionist painter. All of them do it, okay? The next thing that they do is, I'll show you in TV land. They have a drawing here first where they know what the strokes are, and this is what the painting looks like. So I'm going to go over and show you. Like, for instance, they kind of have a drawing here, and this is what the painting looks like. Right, so they have this little drawing, and I'm going to send this to you. Okay, and they do it for each painting. So here's the painting. Here's the drawing. Okay? Now, why that drawing is important is because what they're doing is they're thinking about the negative space. Okay? So I'm going to show you this again. TV land, sorry. Here's the painting. Okay. So you can see that each of these strokes, some of them are lighter, right? And some of them are darker. You go here. So the reason that's important is because with the Impressionist, some of these strokes are lighter and some of these are darker, and they're also going in different directions, right? So some of them are smaller, some of them are curved. So I want you to start thinking in your mind, when you look at your beautiful, I call them, they happen to be my third hand. I just say that. Right, this is what my brushes are. They're my third hand. I look at the shape of the brush, right? And I start thinking about which brush do I want to use to make a different type of stroke. Now, when you're doing Impressionism, you have different types of brushes, okay? So you have brushes that, and these are my favorite, are the ones that are kind of rough. They're natural hair, they're hog hair, okay? I'm sorry I have to go over this. It's a long explanation, but I want you to know why you're using it and what you're doing. So these are hog hair brushes, and they're the typical Impressionist kind of brush because they're going to make that thick stroke. When you pick up the paint and you put it down, you're going to see some of the strokes of the brush, right? Then they have these smoother brushes. They come in different colors. This one happens to be white, but it's very old, right? So now it just has paint on it. But sometimes they'll come like in sable, you know, this kind of color, and they're smooth and they're synthetic brushes, and they'll give you a smoother kind of stroke. But if you have these kind of brushes, you can have a rough stroke. You just have to put a lot more paint on the brush and don't smooth the stroke as much. Just apply it and lift the brush off. Okay, so that's important based on what kind of stroke and what kind of brush you have, smooth or natural hair. And the smooth brushes, you don't have to use as much paint, or if you're using acrylics, as much water for the people in TV land, right? If you're using oils, you wouldn't need that much Gamasol or linseed oil on this. So the other thing that you have to think about is the length of the brush, right? So when I look at a brush, I always think of the length. And the length is important, especially in Impressionist painter, because you want a brush that's a little bit longer. Now, of course, smaller brushes, sometimes, you know, they don't have a large body to them, and this is called the ferrule that connects the brush, the body to the hair. But the longer stroke that you have an option of holding the brush at the end, holding it in the middle, or holding it very, very close. Okay? The other thing is, this is a good brush because it kind of pinches here, so it's, and this the ferrule thing here is longer, so the brushes, this hair goes inside and it doesn't come out as easily. Okay? Now, the other thing as an impressionist painter, if you don't want to, if you already bought your brushes, you can also go to the hardware store and get these brushes real cheap. That's what I do. I mean, nothing against you art stores, I love you. Sometimes I do buy from the art stores. But the hardware stores have, you know, these great brushes. You know, I'm not going to name the store. But the hardware stores have these great brushes where you can use them. And they're like 79, 69 cents. And they make great strokes. And they're also a little bit rough. And we'll use them for what we call washes, which I'm going to do a demo in a minute. Okay? Now, when you're doing an impressionist painter, what did the impressionist painters do? They were mostly painting in oil. So unfortunately in this school, this is not an oil class. I do teach oils, but not in this school at this time. So most of you are going to be using acrylics or watercolors, right? So if you're painting, what you want to do is you want to start with a wash. You don't really have that in drawings. So the definition of a wash would be pigment, and in your case, since you're using watercolors and acrylics, it would be pigment and water. Right? If it was oils, you go, and I have to say the oil painters, because they were impressionists, right? You would see them where they might have linseed oil, or they might have a mixture of terp or linseed or gamma-sol on the canvas. And what they're doing is they're making a very monochromatic wash first on top. So what does monochromatic mean? I'll show you. So here's a demo that I did. This is monochromatic. That means one color, basically, of that same. Do you see all the different kind of values here? You have like a brown, and then a light brown, and then a medium brown. Then I pumped it up a little bit. I added some reds and yellows. This sky here started out as a very, very, very dark brown, right? It was kind of like a brown. And then I put a blue on top. And you might say, why would you do that? That's dumb, right? Well, you do it because if you're using a plain white canvas, which is so stark and so white, what ends up happening is it just looks like light blue, like when you're painting in kindergarten, right? And you're using tempera paints. If you really want the color of the sky and everything to come through, you put colors on top. It's the same thing as if you're painting flesh. Right? You put the undertones underneath and you'd work from dark to light. Now, if you're doing watercolors, you cannot do that, right? Because with watercolors, you can't work dark to light. You have to let the light of the paper show. So in that case, you would do your light washes and then you would build up to the darker washes. So it might be for you a light blue, then another darker blue, then another darker blue on top. Okay, but everybody starts with a wash, and the wash is this background color. Sometimes the wash covers the whole canvas. Sometimes, for an example, this is a different type. This wash here that I did covers this. This was a dark blue, and do you see how this is a dark blue? Because the sky is reflected in the water. Okay, so this whole canvas would be a dark wash, and then I would put colors on top. Each one is different. This is different. These are two different color blues, right? So this would be one color wash and another color wash, and then we would build it up. And if you look at all these little strokes, remember when we were looking at the Van Gogh painting, and I was showing you all these tiny little strokes? Do you see how it's important when you're looking at in a painting that you really want to pay attention to all of the different areas and have each area have a different stroke? You see, if you're wearing clothes and you're wearing all black, it's not going to be exciting, right? But if you, like me, I'm always in black, basically, or red. So this color. So these pants that I'm wearing, right, are going, I'm so, these pants These pants that I'm wearing are shiny, right? They're kind of like leggings, and this is like velvet. You see how they're different color? You want to think of that also for your landscape. So if you have two different color blues, how am I going to change them? I can change the color and add another color into it, or I could change it with the stroke. Okay? So, that being said, let's see what you've learned. Right? Okay, so here's another painting I did real fast. What's happening in this painting, first of all? There's a lot of what going on? There's a lot of white, correct? There's a lot of texture, right? And is the stroke all the same? No, some of these strokes are going across. Some of these strokes are thick and going, horizontal. Some of them are going vertical. I thought about using the opposite areas of the color of the wheel, and the two colors that I chose happen to be this blue, have a blue and a red, and a green and a red, okay? That's the other thing, and I will tell you that. When I'm thinking of a painting, all of these paintings that I did, sorry, TV land. So all of these paintings that I did, these short demos, they all have one thing in common. And the one thing in common that they have are I chose one or two colors to represent the whole painting of how I would start it. And that's the secret, right? So what does that mean? It's easy to see on my paintings, right? But what if we looked at a realistic landscape, and you have to do this? Now, let's look at this picture. You can just shout it out, right? So if this was my main focus, and this was my painting, and I was going to make this into an Impressionist painter, what are the two main colors or three main colors that I could use in here? Let's just say two. You can just shout it out. Right, blue is definitely going to be one of them, right? So let's hold up that wheel again. Let's just say white and black, right, is not a color. We're going to have these kind of tints and shades. So leave out the white and black, because we can add black, it's not really a color, and white to them. So what colors would I use? TV land? Right, I have a lot of orange here, right? Now I'll tell you something. This is kind of tricky because we have these blues, right? This is white, this is blue underneath, and this is blue. The only difference with this blue is this blue has a purple in it. Okay, this blue is a little bit different than this blue. Okay, this blue in here is like a cobalt. Okay, this blue has a lot of red in it. Okay, to make this blue. This is an ultramarine blue, has a little bit of red in it. Okay? And this, we could have a yellow, and then we're just adding red to it. So we kind of have red, yellow, and blue. It's a little bit tricky. This one's easier. What colors would we have here? Right, we have blue and orange, right? And we can combine the blue and orange, and we have this brown, right? We could also have a yellow. Let's look at one more. Yeah, we have this yellow and blue, or we could have an orange, right? Red, orange, and that. Let's do one more. It's a little hard, right? Because don't let this color, we got what? Greens, we got purples here. What do purple and green make together? Right, so we'd have this brown, and we could add a spot. Sorry, TV land. We've had this green and this purple, and we'd add this. This would make this brown. So the thing is, thinking about two main colors and what their combination would be. Now, I'll tell you another secret. Sometimes students have the main colors and they don't know what the background should be. So, here's an example, right? This is kind of an impressionist, fast painting of a flower did in 10 minutes. right? I shouldn't say that because I'm giving it to somebody. But so I chose these main colors, which were red and blues, okay? And then I said, well, I can just add white to that and make it a tint. That's pretty simple. But these colors don't work together as much as them to pop, but I kind of want a really great contrast. So I chose this green. But do you see how this green has blue in it? So it kind of picks up a little bit of this color. This is this would be like a contrasting color. Now, how do I do that? I look, yes.
So the wash on that painting was the green, or what was the wash?
Yes, the wash that I had on this would be, the whole thing would be a light green, and then I built it on top. And the reason I did that is because I could really see the contrast with the reds coming through. You see? It's a little bit easier when you kind of plan your painting ahead of time. This Impressionist cat, his eyes, this whole thing was a green, right? And I said, well, I really want to make the eye color the most important thing in this canvas. So then I really have to have a darker green back here and have this green lighter so it pops. You see what happens if I had a blue back here? How this green really wouldn't pop? So it's kind of important to think about what colors that are you going to place in the background. You know, I could have had a purple here and it would have done something, but it wouldn't have brought this whole idea of the cat under. And this cat anyway, this color of this cat has a green undertone anyway. So it's thinking about what colors that you're going to use. What colors you're going to use, because this is easy painting from a photograph, but if you want to make your photograph look more impressionist, you really got to pump up those colors. So your best friend is going to be the color wheel. So you're going to choose, say for an example, my main color in my sky might have been blue, right? So I'd say, on the opposite side, maybe I'm definitely going to have an orange tree. That's really going to make it pop. And then I'm going to think, do I want a lime green or a violet? Do you see how that works when you're choosing the colors? Okay, so here, the opposite, and maybe one on this side. If you want to lighten it, you can add white to the colors and make them a tint. But that's all as your formula. Choose one color, whatever the color is on the side, and another color on this side, okay? It will work for you. You have to think of that when you're looking at your photographs. So when you're picking your photographs tonight for next week, I really want you to pick photographs where you can make those colors pop. And if your photograph doesn't have it, you can change the colors to make that happen, okay? The next thing is, before you do your painting, or you can do it in class, you're going to have a light sketch, and I'm going to show you how you're going to do that. If your painting is more difficult, you don't have to do a whole drawing. For an example, I have this face here. Show TV land. And what I did is I drew out the face. See, I kind of made this a lot, and maybe you're not that good in drawing, right? So you don't have to have all of these lines completed, but what you're going to do is draw one or two of them. So maybe in the face, the lines are going to be a half C, you know, and maybe in the clothing, they're going to be just horizontal lines. In other words, in this case, I decided that those lines in the water were going to be going across. Yes. No. Okay. What I do, and I'm going to do it step by step, and that's why you're going to do it with me. I'm going to show you how we plot out a painting, and I'm going to do it right now, and that's the next step with the colors. Okay? So I'm going to remove these pages, and I'm going to give everybody a sheet of paper. So I'm going to stop the video now. We're going to have part 2. See you soon.